Well, I'm Maureen Malone, and I am currently the statewide treasurer for CSEA. I began in this position in July of 1994, so this is my 8.5 years in this position, and hopefully we'll continue in the position for a few more.
Good. Okay, let's start. We start you off with this question. Let's go back in time. When did you first even hear of CSEA and how?
I was employed for Madison County, and I worked in the Madison County Bacteriological Laboratory, which was part of the Oneida City Hospital at that time. And we were county employees, and we dealt with our management for our raises, our time off, whatever benefits we had. And one day we were notified that we no longer would deal with our management, that there was a union that came into town, and they were working with the county employees, and from that point forward we would have to deal with the union that was called CSEA, or civil. Then it wasn't CSEA, it was Civil Service Employees Association, and that's what they went by. And we as a collective group, there were about 50 of us. There were employees in the Oneida Hospital and also in the Hamilton Hospital. We had a branch in Hamilton, New York. And we pooled money together to get an attorney to fight being in the union. And so we, as a small group of about 50, hired an attorney, and unfortunately we were told that there was nothing we could do about it, that the union had come into the county, had been approved, and even though we were not asked about it, we didn't vote on it, we had no voice in the union coming in, that we were going to be represented by CSEA. And at the time they did the first contract, several of our employees actually lost money from what we were making.
And when was this first contract?
Let's see, I think it impacted upon us in, I'm going to guess, 1973. Because after we were informed that we couldn't get out of CSEA, we decided that many of us would become active and we would just take over CSEA then. If we couldn't get out, we would take it over, especially when we had negative impact by being in the union. People losing money, which was when you make $3,500 a year, which is what I was making at the time, it's a little difficult to lose money at that point in your life.
Yeah. How did that happen? I mean, what?
Well, the union evidently, the story is they weren't aware of us because we weren't in the county buildings, we weren't part of the county unit, we were in the hospital. We were in the city hospital and we were in the community hospital in Hamilton. So they never spoke to any of us. They didn't know what we made. They just slotted us in salary grades, and we went from there.
So you were represented by somebody that really wasn't representing.
Didn't know we were there.
So.
But they did after a while.
Yeah. So tell me how that. I mean, what did you do?
Well, I personally didn't get active immediately. Some friends of mine did. We formed our own unit, of course, when we were told we were part of this whole thing. We formed our own unit and slowly became more involved at the local, which was the county local. And a friend of mine said that there was going to be a region meeting, which we had no clue what that was. And I had 4 days off because we used to work 10 days on, 4 days off if we had to work the weekend. I had 4 days off the weekend of the meeting, and so they decided I should go. And that was my first involvement in CSEA. I went to a region meeting in Oswego, New York.
You were volunteered.
They volunteered me to go, and I went. And it was quite an experience. It was an eye-opening experience for me.
Anybody there that we know? I mean, personalities, people that were involved in anything later on in CSEA?
Well, at that time, Dick Cleary was the president of Region 5, which is where I'm from, Central Region 5. Some of the region officers, Helene Callahan, who was treasurer of the region at that time, really took me under her wing and decided she'd never met somebody from Madison County before, and we became fast friends. Helene Callahan, she goes way back. Ted Wenzel was the president of the union at that time. Helen Hanlon was an officer of the region. Helen has been involved her whole life and recently passed away. She was secretary of the retirees local in Syracuse. So a real loss, but she was active at that time. I'm trying to think of the region officers. The first thing that I did, of course, was there was a sign for a hospitality room. And so I thought, well, let me go see what this is about. It was about 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. And some names, Angelo Vallone and Carlo Guardi, who were from the Binghamton area, hosted hospitality rooms in the region at that time, and that's really where you went to meet everybody. And it was wonderful. But I over-imbibed, and I know there was a meeting that night, and I know I was there, but I can't tell you what happened. Not that it happened to me often. But that was my first real introduction to CSEA at the region level.
And you saw it as, was it a social thing? Was it what?
Very intense meetings. Actually, at that time in the early 70s, it was quite the place to be. There was definite points of view. The state people, which is what the union was formed with, state people, were very much in control of the union at the regional level, very knowledgeable in comparison to the county people who at that time were just beginning to organize. That was like the beginning of the county people, beginning of towns and villages. It was right after the Taylor Law was put into effect. So it was really the birth of the local government division as we know it today. Then it was the county division, state and county. And it was the beginning of that, and so there weren't as many local government people at that time, but as we know, as the years have progressed, more and more local government people have become involved, and the division is actually the larger division now.
Was there resistance to people like wanting to get involved in the beginning?
I don't know if there was resistance. I wouldn't call it a resistance. It was just a change. It was a changing period in CSEA. They were out trying to organize in the local government division, expand the union, grow the union, and it was happening at a fast rate.
Well, they had to expect that you'd want to get involved then.
Well, if I recall at that meeting, it was dominated by state people, as you would expect it to be. Because we were new. We were just getting our feet wet. Actually, in the Oswego area, there was a man who had been active for a while. His name was Fran Miller, who at the region level was actually, we broke out into state and county divisions at the region level, and he was chair of the county division, and he was from Oswego at that point. So that was my first big CSEA meeting. And actually, it's what led to everything else, because I thought, this is great. This is very interesting. And the thing I found was that if you knew people, and to know people, you have to attend these functions, that there really was a camaraderie, and it was tough as an outsider to go to my first meeting and really not know anybody.
So okay, so that was your first. And what was the progression? What happened after that?
After that, well, I used to be a party person. I wouldn't say I'm a party person now, but I enjoyed it and decided that I wanted to continue on. My friends who were involved in Madison County, much of what had gone on were just certain county people, so there was like a little coup going on in Madison County. A lot of activity as far as officers went, and so I found out a little bit and decided to run for the board of directors. Why fool around?
Go for it.
Go for it. And the person that I beat gave me some wrong information, and I showed up at 33 Elk Street one day, the day he told me to go, and walked in and asked for the board of directors, and they all looked at each other and laughed. And of course, it was the wrong day and everything, but they were very helpful. I can't recall who might have been involved at that point because my memory's not that good.
It's pretty
But
good so far.
but the first meeting I went to was actually in Niagara Falls,
Oh, really?
and it was the most interesting of meetings.
When was that?
74 maybe?
Okay. Interesting why?
Very interesting. At the board of directors meeting, which was at that point it was held in conjunction with the convention, that was the board of directors meeting where they voted on making the region presidents full-time. Prior to that, they were not full-time employees as they're considered now. They did their job and served as the regional presidents, much in the same way that our local presidents serve now, doing their job, doing the business of the union, and doing everything at once. And that's actually the meeting where
When did that change?
the change was made to make region presidents full-time.
Cool.
So that was my first board meeting.
Yeah.
And at my first convention, which was attached to that meeting, Sam McGavro at that point was chair of the county division statewide. And as I said, it was a state organization. They didn't address a lot of issues dealing with counties or local governments. And Ted Wenzel was the president. And they said he had organized it so that if the business at hand continued to just be state, if he stood up and made a gesture, all the county people were going to stand up and leave the convention, and that's what we did. Sam stood up, all the county people stood up, and we walked out of the convention hall in Niagara Falls as a group.
Powerful.
That's the way it was.
Yeah.
That's when it was fun.
Yeah, that's always fun to stir things up.
It was
isn't
fun. It was fun,
Especially when you win.
and from that point forward, there was a change in the way a lot of the business was done at the annual delegates meeting. They knew that local government was a force. They knew that the county division was cohesive and organized, and that if we didn't like what was going on, we were going to get up and walk out, and that's what we did.
Good.
Sam McGavro was the chair at that time,
Good.
and he's still active today.
Wow.
Still active today as a retiree.
That's
Serves
good.
on the statewide Constitution and Bylaws Committee now.
That's
Great man.
good. Yeah.
I'd say he was one of the people responsible for changing the face of local government in CSEA.
Wow. Yeah, you did see.
That was my first meeting.
Your first meeting. Like, yeah, what happened at this?
Wow!
Was it all downhill from there? Or what?
No, not quite,
Well,
but
good. Tell me what happens next then in your history.
well, I became friends with the current Region 5 President, Jim Moore. Very good friends. We worked very well together for a long, long time. And I became more active in my local and more active in the region. And I eventually, I was initially in the region chair of the program committee, which set up all the region meetings and the sites, etc. And then I became the second vice president of the region. And at the same time, I continued as the board member from my county and ended up being local president in Madison County. Then, and this continued for, I mean, things just progressed for a few years. Then I hit a bump in the road when the county decided to sever their relationship with their laboratories. So in 1980, prior to that, I skipped over the whole affiliation thing,
Oh, that's
which
not-
is the purpose of this.
No,
whole
that's
thing.
only
You
part of
edit
the
this
purpose.
film, don't you, Skip?
But never erase anything.
It's only
Oh.
part of the purpose, but yeah, let's talk about that.
But I
now.
continued on the board. I met people from across the state, became very good friends. In fact, I meant to bring in the pictures. I have some pictures of how we used to, in our prior newspaper, the chief, the leader, it
Leader,
was,
yeah.
And they used to do a center page spread of the board of directors members at that time. I don't know if you've seen these. I think I have them in my office. I have some memorabilia in my
Oh, good,
office.
good.
Um,
Steve will wanna put them in whatever we,
well, I've showed it to him, but
he'll get there, he'll get.
he
Anyway.
and so I met people from across the state, which,
Mhm.
you know, Madison County, I didn't get out much.
Right.
So one of the things that happened, Carmine DiBattista, who is the past Region 3 president, this is back in the 70s, he was the board rep, and I would say probably in 75, 76, he had talked about his contract. So I asked him if I could get a copy. And so he sent me a copy of his contract, and we took some of the provisions out of the Westchester contract and submitted them as proposals in Madison County. And at that time, you know, there wasn't a lot of knowledge about all of this. There wasn't trainings to teach people how to negotiate against the union. It was real negotiations. And so we got a lot of proposals in our contract that came right out of the Westchester contract, which we probably wouldn't have even thought of had we not been able to exchange information.
Right.
So that was the beginning of my networking, I guess. At that time, well, there's so many memories, but
We got time.
I could go on for hours.
Okay, you got enough tape?
Oh, yeah.
I got
Oh
time.
yeah,
He's
we got time.
tape?
You got time.
Yeah.
But I also met Mary Sullivan, who's the
Mhm.
executive vice president. We became very close friends. A lot of people that I met in Region 5 through the years. Pat Crandall, very active in SUNY, very active in the region. She's now retired. She's in Florida. I'm at the age where a lot of the people that I've spent a lot of time with are now retiring. In fact, Saturday night I just went to a retirement party for Grace Ann Aloisi, who was from Westchester County and one of the people that I met back in the 70s, that we became friends. But I continued on the board, and in 1978 we were summoned into Albany for a special board meeting. We were put under lock and key. Was it the Italian American Club? I think. And on Washington Avenue. It was right after we had lost PS&T, or the Professional Scientific and Technical Unit, on the state side. And the board was called in, and at that time, Bill McGowan was then the president. He had served with Ted Wenzel, defeated Ted Wenzel in an election, and he was then the president of CSEA. And at that time, we were being raided across the state because we were an independent union. We were not affiliated with any national union, any international union. We were a growing force as an independent union in New York State, which is why when the PS&T went, there was no protection against that. Later, when the Teamsters raided the Thruway employees, we had no protection against that. So in 78, we were called into a special board meeting. We were not allowed to talk to anyone. If we went to the bathroom, we were escorted to the bathroom because it was all hush-hush. And that's when the proposal came to the board to do a trial affiliation with AFSCME, who was raiding us across New York State in our local government division, in counties, in the towns, wherever it might be. AFSCME was there because they're a huge organization. They had money. They had the ability to come in, and slowly we were being picked apart on the local government side. So President McGowan came in with the proposal for a trial affiliation with AFSCME. And that was, I think it was in June of 1978, I think. It was around that time. And the board voted to do that.
Now, was it a close vote?
I don't remember.
No. I mean, because there were people who were against it.
Absolutely.
They were
Because
afraid to lose the autonomy.
because we were independent, they were afraid of the autonomy issue. We, of course, had our own rules and regulations, and they were afraid that we were going to be lost, we were going to be swallowed up by AFSCME. And I do believe the only way that went through was to do the trial affiliation.
Yeah.
And it was sold in such a manner that after a 2-year trial, if we didn't like it, we could get out of it.
Mhm.
And the president of AFSCME at that time was Jerry Worf.
Good man.
Jerry Worf, who was a national labor leader, was a well-known personality, and he truly was a personality. And he was head of AFSCME at that time. So then the board voted to have what was called the Blue Ribbon Panel to study the affiliation. And there were people appointed from each region to be represented on this panel, and then we had a separate chair. And let me see if I get this right. We had Mike Curtin from Region 1, who was in the school districts. He has since passed away. Terrific guy for the schools, did a lot of work in those areas. We had Felton King, who at that time it was called Willowbrook, if you remember anything about
yes.
Willowbrook. But we had Felton King, who was on the committee. We had Pat Micholi from Region 3. At that time, he was a board rep. I'm not sure if he was local president yet. He may still have been the Westchester County unit president. Then he became the Westchester County local president and eventually the president of Region 3. Dolores Farrell from Region 4, who was from the State Division, the Department of Civil Service. I was on it from Region 5, and of course I represented Madison County at that time. And Paul Christopher from Region 6, who I think at that time he was from West Seneca Developmental Center, which is where President McGowan was from. And he represented Region 6 on the committee, and the chair of the committee was Bob Latimer, who at that time was the Region 6 president. And part of the charge of the committee was to go around the state. We held meetings in every region to get feedback from the leadership, and if the membership was aware from the membership on what the affiliation might do, how it might affect them. We made several trips to Washington to meet with AFSCME to see what they had to offer. We were a big group. We're an independent group. We were used to certain services and certain things to be provided. What was the bonus to being part of them, and what would be worth our while? Quite frankly, it was going to be a financial proposition to join AFSCME, to be part of AFSCME. We were determined to keep our autonomy at that point. We were determined to keep our own rules and regulations. We didn't want to fold in under AFSCME as such. We didn't want to be swallowed up. And I think that's still the feeling of a lot of our members today.
Yep.
You know, that we are who we are, and we're going to stay that way.
Yes.
You know, we are a group of boisterous, independent, loudmouth unionists, and we're going to stay that way, and we didn't want to feel that we were going to lose that autonomy.
Right.
And so we spent 2 years doing all of this work, all of these meetings. A lot of work went into the affiliation agreement that finally went to a special delegate meeting in January of 1980.
And that's when it became
And
real
that's
affiliation.
and that's when the real affiliation began in January of 1980. And as part of the proposal, we negotiated to keep our own constitution and bylaws, which we still have today. We govern under our own rules and regulations. We have our own financial standards codes that we use. We have our own judicial board system that we use. We do not use the AFSCME judicial board. There are certain areas where we fall under the AFSCME Constitution, but I would guess 80% of the way we function today is totally autonomous from the AFSCME way. That we've maintained our ability to be ourselves. And to me, I was part of the committee, I've been part of it all these years, but I just can't stop being CSEA.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the way it is.
Yeah. So,
And so that was the big affiliation.
yeah, that's the story. Now tell me, what were the advantages of besides not being rated? I mean, obviously that was the immediate thing, but what were the financial advantages to CSEA? Otherwise, we wouldn't.
The immediate advantage, of course, as you said, is to stop the rating.
Yeah.
Well, that's a lot of money is involved in trying to protect your turf.
Sure.
So the immediate relief was freeing up some cash for us and freeing up staff, because when you get into a rating situation, it takes a lot of staff time, and it takes a lot of member involvement to keep yourselves whole. So a lot of that ceased at that point from AFSCME. It hasn't ceased totally, but it's ceased from AFSCME. They had some departments, some services that we did not.
Member services.
Well, AFSCME's not really hands-on. They're like the overseer. So our staff, we are hands-on, which is another thing we didn't want to get swallowed up in. But we have our own staff. But some global things, as far as their research capacity, to do a comparison perhaps of a contract in a Rockland County or an Erie County and compare it to a comparable county in Ohio or California or Florida. We never had that ability. The ability to have an impact at the federal level. We, of course, have an excellent political action department going. We didn't, well, at that time we didn't have a political action department. So we didn't have the organizational piece as far as...
Political action for inside the state?
Right.
Oh.
We didn't have that yet. There's a lot of things that have changed over the years. We didn't have political action department then. That was, of course, new to us, you know, that organizational piece of being able to touch the federal officials, you know, let alone... we had a networking political action thing going on here, but we didn't have a structure like we have today. So that was new to us. The money piece, well, it's gotten a little out of hand, I think, but who knew then what we know now? If we'd known then what we know now, we would have restructured the money piece and the agreement. Because right now, I think it costs us a lot of money to be involved in AFSCME, and I'm not quite sure we get all of that back. But when you get into the $17 million range, that's a lot of money.
You're the treasurer. You gotta pay attention to that. That's right.
But that's the piece of their constitution we're under.
Yeah. So if you could, you change it.
If I,
to CSEA's advantage.
well, of course. Of course, but I don't think they're going to allow us to do that at this point. It's been a little long to restructure that part of the agreement. But all in all, they were the big dog. We were the little dog. It was an impressive show.
That sounds like you're wagging the dog a lot.
It was an impressive show. And still today, I mean, when we go to workshops, when we go to various functions, our people come back. I love to have CSEA members go to those things, because when they come back, they see, wow, we already knew that stuff. We're a little ahead of the game in most areas. We're ahead of a lot of other unions. We're ahead of AFSCME in a lot of the things that we do, the workshops we hold, the information we give to our membership. CSEA, I would rank us with anybody. I'd compare us to anybody
I know, I have a quote here
across
from
the country.
you. CSEA is the most democratic as well as technically advanced union I have come in contact with.
It's true.
It's right off your bio on your website.
It's true.
That's wonderful. I mean, that's...
And the more members we send to functions, the more they see, you know, it's hard to convince your own people how good you are.
Yeah.
But when we send them to other things and they see unionists from other unions and see what goes on in other areas throughout the AFL-CIO, they come back and say, we're way ahead of the game here. And I believe it still today.
Yeah, I think so.
And I think we're pretty darn lucky.
Yeah, I think you've done a lot of things right. Now, you got from region to statewide, how? I mean,
Oh, I have another part in between.
Oh, let's go. Come on, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
After-
jump ahead. That's right, we just went back. and
I went to
covered-
work. I went to work for AFSCME in the middle of
Oh, you
this.
did?
Yes.
Oh.
In 1980, when Madison County decided to cease operation of their laboratories and they went private, we were
Yeah.
all laid off.
Oh.
And the quote from the personnel director in Madison County was, "She'll get a job back here when I'm dead and buried." So there wasn't a way that I was going to get back into Madison County at
Well,
that
because
time.
you were an organizer?
Well, because I was the local president, I stood up for what I believed. A lot of the administration at that time was Republican, so I made a big deal of changing my registration to Democratic because I was a registered Republican, and I said I can't be involved with these types of people who just throw people's lives away at the blink of an eye and really didn't care what happened to us. 50 people who had worked there, some for 20, 30 years, and they just, shut the place down.
Yeah.
And in 1980, that was something new and unusual for us. So I had been a thorn in their side
Yeah.
for a little while.
Right, I guess.
So they were happy to get rid of me. But at that point, then,
But they didn't get rid of you.
no, well, not really. There was a federal program at that time called CETA,
Yeah.
CETA. If I could remember what it stood for, I'd tell you. But they had, AFSCME had CETA reps across the country monitoring what was going on with the federal funding, how it was impacting on jobs in the states, and if things were going according to Hoyle. And at that time, there was an opening in the New York, New Jersey area, and I became the CETA representative for AFSCME at that time. So I went to work for AFSCME in 1980. Eventually and I worked under Kathy Collette, who just recently retired from AFSCME. She was my boss.
You should go around and interview all the people you know who retired.
There's tons. Boy, at this point, there's tons. But I worked for Kathy Collette. Jerry Werf was the president.
Yeah, I want to know about Jerry. You said he was a character. And I
What a
wanna
wonderful
give me
man.
a picture. Give me some incident that tells me about Jerry Wolf.
Well, let me tell you about Jerry Werf.
Please.
Jerry Werf, the main picture is when he came to Albany and told Bill McGowan that the union was being run by the attorneys, and he put it out point blank, and Bill McGowan threw him out of CSEA headquarters. But Jerry Werf knew what was going on before we knew what was going on, and that's when the whole thing started to boil. But Jerry Werf was a great man. Boy, I still keep my card when I was employed by AFSCME that he signed. I had a card signed by another president, which I do not have. I have the card that was signed by Jerry Werf. I thought he was one of the greatest, real great people that I'd ever met. I admired him. I thought he was a terrific man. Before he was my boss.
Yeah. Good.
So I truly was impressed with Jerry Werf. But anyway, I went to work for AFSCME. I was stationed in New York. I worked down at the Twin Towers, and occasionally I'd work in the Utica CSEA office. And I covered New York and New Jersey for CETA, and then eventually when that program was dissolved at the federal level, I became an international union rep. This is like 1981.
Yeah.
1982, and then President Werf passed away. There were some deals cut between CSEA vice presidents and some leaders from around the country. At that time, there was a question whether it be Victor Gottbaum from New York City, who became the new president of AFSCME, or whether it would be Jerry McEntee. And some deals were cut with some of the representatives from CSEA. At that time, we didn't bring our whole contingent of people. It was just the few elected officers who went. And there was a split then between McGowan and then Executive Vice President McDermott. and McGowan was going with Gottbaum, and McDermott cut a deal with McEntee and threw a lot of CSEA votes to McEntee. It eventually led to him becoming the president. And part of the deal when this happened was that the New York area office for AFSCME was to be cleaned out. Because in the area office at that time, Bob McEnroe was the area director. Steve Regenstreif was the assistant area director. No, yes. And Tony, oh my God, Tony Corbo worked with Council 82. Ron Coder was in the area office. John Wyro, who came up through CSEA, was the board rep from Tompkins County, and was the one of the leaders in Tompkins County. There were 3 of them that took over in Tompkins County. There was John Wyro, who was the board rep. There was Louis Naiman, who eventually went to work for AFSCME and has now moved on, and Jim Hennerty, who still works for CSEA today. So those were the 3 amigos from Tompkins County, and John ended up going to work for AFSCME, and Arnie Wimpfler, who was head of our schools group in CSEA, went to work for AFSCME, and I was out of the office. So the area office was cleaned out. Bob went to 1707, became the director of 1707. Steve went back to Washington, and of course is head of the retiree division today. Tony Corbo, I wish I knew what happened to him. I don't. I don't know where he ended up. Ron Coder eventually ended up in Arizona, and I think now he's been phased out.
West Virginia.
Now he's been phased out, hasn't he? So he's history. Arnie and John went to California. They eventually married. Now they're split up, but anyway. She went back to teaching, and he got involved in the California, which council is it? The one in Los Angeles?
36.
Is that it? I don't know. The council in California. He ran for IVP and lost, and so then he was phased out. And I was given the choice. I mean, this is eventually, a lot of things happened in the meantime, but so I was given the opportunity to go to Des Moines, Boston, there was one other place, and I chose to do none of the above, so I left AFSCME.
I can understand Des Moines not going there.
Well, John Wyro went there, and he called me one night. He was at a pig roast. I said, well, that does it. Enough is enough. My idea of camping is a Holiday Inn, so you can imagine.
So
I'm sorry I moved. But
so what did you decide to do then?
I was on unemployment for a while, and then I bought a yarn and craft shop in Oneida, New York.
Oh.
And before I had carpal tunnel, I was quite crafty, and I went into business for myself. Of course, Oneida is a small community, and it wasn't that successful, so I needed supplemental income. And so, with some help, I got not a part-time job. My mind is like shot. But in 1983, I went to work at Mohawk Valley Psych Center. Temporary. It was a temporary position. But I took it. It was only supposed to be like a 6-week job. But I took it because it gave me the ability to get my retirement back instated, because I'd left the retirement system. If you come back in, at that point, if you came back in within so many years, you went back to your original tier. So that kept me in Tier 1 in the New York State retirement system, if nothing else. So I went there, and here I am. I started at Mohawk Valley Psych Center in 1983, Halloween, actually. I started Halloween. A lot of jobs that I've started on a holiday. So my first day is a day off.
Yeah, right. Smart.
My first day with AFSCME might have been like Memorial Day or
Yeah.
something, and I got it off. I said, well, this is great. So I just start on significant days of my life, and then I'll have a holiday.
Easy to remember.
But mine was Halloween of 1983 when I went back into the state. I'd had 10 years in Madison County, and so I wanted to continue my retirement, which is one reason I went back. And
Got back involved with
my temporary job turned into a permanent position at Mohawk Valley. And then in 1990, there was downsizing across the state, and I was bumped back from my level. At that point, I was a Lab Tech 2. I was bumped back to a Lab Tech 1. And so I was on the preferred list. And then a vacancy occurred at SUNY Health Science Center. So in I'm going too fast. And when I was at Mohawk Valley, I became involved once again in the region. Let's see, what was I first? I think Jim Moore, who was the region president, appointed me corresponding secretary at that point. So I became back involved in the region, and once again I came back to the statewide board as the mental hygiene board rep from Region 5.
Right.
So I served in local government in the board, and now I was on the state. Prior to that, Bill McGowan had appointed me chair of a statewide committee. So I served on a lot of statewide committees.
Methods and procedures.
I was chair of methods and procedures. I had been on Constitution and bylaws. Prior to having a judicial board, I was on what was called the trial board. Back in the 70s, I was on the trial board. I was on the statewide CETA committee, Constitution and bylaws, chair of methods and procedures. Then I was back on judicial board at the statewide level. I'm trying to think. There may have been a couple other things I was in.
Afraid to get involved, are you?
No, I'm not.
That's good.
And then along the way, changes were made in our Constitution and bylaws that created the Political Action Department. That 3% of the dues automatically goes to fund our Political Action Department, so that's when that began. I think that was in the early 80s.
Good history there.
That was in the early 80s when that occurred. I went back on the board. Then I became the region treasurer. And then I transferred my position to the SUNY Health Science Center in Syracuse so that I could get back up to a Lab Tech 2.
Yeah.
I went as the phlebotomy supervisor, drawing blood, not lobotomy, phlebotomy.
Yeah.
And it's the position I hold today.
Great.
I was the region treasurer. Then I decided along the way that if I ever went any farther, I would like to be the treasurer because I enjoyed the position of region treasurer so much.
And your first mentor was treasurer, right?
And that, well, Helene Callahan, yeah. Plus my birthday's on income tax day.
Oh, well, happy birthday.
So I was like meant to be the treasurer,
I
don't you think?
So. It's all falling into place.
It is falling into place, but at the time, there's so much history as far as the McDermott McGowan wars.
Yeah.
The special delegates meeting that was held in Syracuse, where I was at that point. I was chair of the Sergeant at Arms, and a couple of the Sergeant at Arms from Long Island wouldn't put down their briefcases, and to this day, I'm sure they were packing heat. I had a room in the Hotel Syracuse in my name that I wasn't staying in. Bill had hired a separate attorney to come in and be in that room and give advice to our parliamentarians, Celeste Rosecrans. They had walkie-talkies and mics where
Pause for a second.
Sure. Is that why that red light's blinking?
Yeah. And we're back
We're
again.
gonna pick up
Sorry
with
for that delay.
Well, you said Worf knew that the lawyers were running CSEA.
Don't ask me how he knew. He was too smart.
You don't know how he knew? But he knew.
Well,
But
I was based out of Washington
Yeah,
at that
I
point.
know, but he
so
knew.
he had the idea.
So how did it happen that they, all right, they took over, they ran it, but what happened, that's what you're about to tell me, is the story of how
Well,
this-
see now you've sparked Solidarity Day when I worked for
Yeah,
AFSCME.
I wanna hear it all.
The first Solidarity
Good.
Day.
Yeah,
This was really new for CSEA to be involved in a march.
this
of-
was
of-
when in the.
That was in the very early, like 81 maybe,
Yes.
was the first Solidarity
Yeah.
Day. And if you look at the pictures, you'll see big CSEA banners,
Yeah.
and I can pick out people in the pictures from years ago. And I was working for AFSCME, and I was up on the hill, the hotel on the hill. What is it now? Now it might be a Marriott. Hyatt.
Yeah.
And I was meeting buses and meet and greet and getting people organized, and we didn't sleep for 48 hours straight, I'm sure of that.
Yeah.
And to get there, that's when there was the PATCO. Was that the PATCO strike for the first one? And we had to train. There was the PATCO strike, and we couldn't fly, and we had to train from here to Washington. And so we were exhausted anyway. We had to meet all the buses, get everybody organized. We didn't sleep. It was the most exhilarating thing I'd been involved in. And just to see the sea of green with all the various banners from across the country, and to see all these people who hitchhiked and thumbed and got to Washington for this Solidarity Day. And this was Jerry Worf at his best, speaking to this crowd of people to get them energized and organized and aware of what was going on at the federal level, how there were strike breakers and the PATCO strike, and how that was going to impact all of us in the future. And it was a wonderful experience. But as I said, I only worked for AFSCME for about 2.5 years before I came back. And also during the 80s, I was involved in some campaigns for statewide election for a couple different people. Jim Moore ran twice and was unsuccessful both times. I was heavily involved in his campaigns. And then Pat Micholi ran. Of course, by that point, there'd been a division of the House. There was the McDermott House, and there was the McGowan House.
Was this over a lot of issues?
It was over a lot of issues. It was over who controlled the union. When Bill actually finally realized what was going on, I'm not sure for a long time he realized. You know, he was from West Seneca Developmental Center. He was a bread and butter guy, blue collar, sit at the negotiating table, work as hard as he could, morning, noon, and night kind of guy. He was not sophisticated. He was not clever, not overly educated. He was a unionist. He was a member. He was roll your sleeves up, let's go. He did more, quite frankly, for CSEA as far as negotiations and as far as benefit packages under his realm. They created the Employee Benefit Fund. They created CSEAP. They created Quality of Work Life. They created EAP. Just an immeasurable number of things were done under the Bill McGowan reign. And I only knew one president before him. That was Ted Wenzel. I didn't know the presidents prior to Ted Wenzel. I began in the Ted Wenzel area, but I don't think any president before or any president since has done for the membership what Bill McGowan did for the membership. And I think when he became aware of what was actually going on the union side, that's when things really started to change, and who was in charge, who had the power. That's when all the who has the power things started to change, and that's when the whole union changed. CSCA is not in my estimation, is not at all today what it was then. We don't. And another part of it, I have this whole thesis about when we moved our meetings away from the Concord Hotel. Because when we had our meetings at the Concord Hotel, every member was under one roof.
Yeah.
You fought together, you played together, you worked together, morning, noon, and night. You parked your car on Sunday, you prayed to God you could get it out on Friday and drive it home. I mean, that's the way it was.
Yeah.
It was. We used to have conventions twice a year back then, spring and fall, and everybody was under one roof. You got to know people from all over the state. Once again, you could have dinner with people from Long Island. You could go to a party with somebody from Ulster County. You could go and sit down and have a drink with somebody from Monroe County or from wherever, Steuben County. I had a good friend from Steuben County, Lyle Slocum, actually. And it was different back then. Everybody knew everybody. You could have fun. One night we stole the AFSCME welcome CSEA to the Concord Hotel. It was a big, huge sign that we took up into one of the hospitality rooms. All the women threw their lipstick out, and we there's pictures of this.
Oh, really?
We stayed up all night and we changed the sign from AFSCME Welcome CSEA. I think at that time we made it Region 5 Welcome CSEA. We put it up on the stage. It was this huge to-do. Joe McDermott was president of Region 4, so he made a 1 and put it in front of our V to make it Region 4. We had people guarding the sign, protecting the sign. It was, it was just, there was a camaraderie that we've lost. We've lost it. And Danny doesn't like to hear my Concord theses, especially nowadays, but that's when everybody knew everybody, everybody got along, we were one. Since that time, split off in splinter groups, quite frankly. That first convention in Niagara Falls, all the regions were in different hotels. Something would happen at the convention, everybody'd run back to their hotel, they'd plot and scheme as to how to do it. It changed the face of CSEA.
Yeah.
Sadly, I was part of it. And I feel bad about that today. I really feel badly about being part of something that changed CSEA and continues to change CSEA. And maybe we needed a little something, a little change, but not quite as much. And I feel sorry for activists today because it's very difficult to network. It's very difficult to get to know people from other areas. As I said, the people serving now were all of the same age bracket. We all came up at the same time. Mary and I have known each other probably closely since 1975, 76. When you know people for 25 years, it makes a big difference. But even that, people changed. Mary and I split and went different ways. I went to the McGowan camp. She went to the McDermott camp. We separated 20 years. Well, not 20, but 15. And for a long time never spoke, And now, this is personal stuff, but
that's
but it's part of it,
Sure it is.
We had the special delegate meeting in Syracuse. This is where I was before. When we were changing the Constitution, and at that point the delegates elected John Francisco to be the statewide treasurer. Barbara Fauser had been the treasurer, had retired. Barbara had beaten Jack Gallagher, who had been the treasurer forever and ever. But they appointed John Francisco. That's when people went to court, things changed. The power was taken back away from the delegates, given back to the board. I think John Francisco was treasurer long enough to get new glasses and a suit. And then he was out.
Wow.
And once again in Niagara Falls, it's a hot town. That's where Mary Sullivan was put in as the treasurer. And what a hoopla it's been ever since. So that Mary became the statewide treasurer, and things changed. She was treasurer with McGowan, and then McDermott ran against McGowan and beat him. Actually, no, Bill was getting done, and Jim Moore ran against Jim and Joe McDermott ran against each other for statewide president. That was the second time Jim ran. The first time was in 1980, I think, when he ran against McGowan. But Joe became the president. I was on the outs. I had my thank you for serving letters, I think, I think before June 30th, before the end of the term. So I was history for quite a while. I was still very active in the region and doing things at the region level. And then Mary decided that she was going to move on. And so when Joe retired, that's when Danny was going to move up. Even if Joe didn't retire, Danny had already announced he was going to run against Joe. Mary decided to leave statewide treasurer and run for executive vice president. And of course, at that time, Candy Saxon was the statewide secretary, and she ran, and Barbara Reeves, the current secretary, ran against her and defeated her. She was actually the only incumbent in the position of statewide secretary. All the other offices were essentially vacant. And 4 people ran for statewide treasurer. And I still say it's because of the Concord Hotel and my ability to meet people in other areas that I was able to rely on people in Region 3 and Long Island and a variety of places that I knew. Like, for example, Carmine DiBattista at that point was the local president in Westchester. And was he local president or unit president? Well, whatever he was. And I went down to Westchester and he walked me through DSS and the health department and, you know, building after building in Westchester. And that relationship, you know, was from years before. So that's my Concord Hotel thesis anyway. But I became the statewide treasurer. And of course, from that point to this, that's where I serve. But I'm sure I've missed 100,000 things.
I know, but you'll write them down and we'll come back. But let me ask you a couple of other questions. Maybe that will stimulate some other things.
Okay.
Just a few. I know this is a hard question because there's so many things that you've been involved in, but what are you most proud of in your CSEA?
What am I most proud of?
Yeah.
I think it's tough because I served in Madison County. I don't know if anybody else has served in local government division on the board and the state division, plus been employed for AFSCME in the middle and come back to be a statewide officer.
Pretty unique, yeah. It is unique.
But I think my time as a statewide officer has been very rewarding because sometimes I feel like I really help people. Like this morning, I was downstairs with 3 people who are from Troy schools, and they said, well, gee, Maureen, you do this every day. I said, you know, I'm a lab technician.
Yeah.
You know, I draw blood. I do lab tests. This is not my job, but this is what I love. I love sitting down with people like you to help you and show you. And I think the integrity of the financial piece of CSEA is very strong, and I'm very proud of that. And sure, we get blips in the road, but who doesn't? You know, we have a couple blips right now, but that's human nature. We have over 1,700 officers in CSEA. And, you know, I'm proud of our integrity. I'm proud of our ability to help those people. My joy is going out and sitting down with 3 people from Troy schools who are, you know, bus drivers or maintenance men or whatever, and help them and hopefully give them some help along the way. And just to be there for people. And you know what's great is to be able to, sometimes people just need to have somebody to listen to them. And I have that ability as a statewide officer, you know, to listen to people and maybe point them in a direction they hadn't thought of, or give them a phone number for help or do something, and that's so rewarding. We don't get that every day, but on the days that does happen, it makes you remember why you're here.
That's what you mean.
That's what the
Yeah.
joy is. Yesterday, having 800 plus members show up to lobby, you know, to try and get some work done on a budget that affects their daily life.
Yeah.
That's so heartwarming to see those people come into Albany like that, take a day off from work, give up their own time and energy to do that. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. The other side of the coin. What are you most disappointed by? I know there's a few things because you mentioned it, but what's the thing that disappoints you the most?
This isn't going anywhere.
Not going anywhere. Staying right here.
I'm quite disappointed in our president right now. I'm not quite sure his head is with the membership of CSEA. I feel bad about it. I feel very bad about it. I think there's a lot of things we can accomplish for the members, but I'm not quite sure where the guidance is coming from. If Rome were in feathers were here, I could blame it on them. But they're not. So I'm not quite sure sometimes. I think there's a lot more we could do as a collective group for the membership of this union. I feel very bad about that. Very bad.
Well, thank you for your honesty. Okay, what do you see as the most important events, I'll make that plural, events during your time of involvement? 'Cause I'm sure
Wow.
there's more than one.
Well,
You could prioritize if you want.
well, I'll just start at the beginning. You
Yeah.
know, at that first convention when the local government division walked out, and CSEA finally realized that there was more than the state side. At that same convention, I neglected to mention that's when methods and procedures really set up the regional structure.
Oh, yeah.
That's when the
That's
regions
right.
were really structured. Was at that methods and procedures
Very beginning.
report in 1974.
Yeah.
And the establishment of full-time officers. I think that's been a huge help to the members. They don't realize it, but it gives ability of activists to have access to their leadership right on the spot.
Let's talk about the region thing just for a minute. Let's
Sure.
get off of this for a second and just, what was it like before that?
What were they called? They weren't called regions.
Districts?
Conference.
Conferences.
They were conferences. It was a much more loosely based operation, you know.
But was there somebody heading each conference the way there is now with the region? Or how did it work?
Yeah, but as I said, they continued to work. They were,
Yeah.
you know, they were volunteer type things.
Yeah.
You know, there weren't actual. You really didn't think of it
Full-time,
as,
yeah.
you know, as your area.
Yeah.
But after 1974, they actually created the word regions. They structured it out. We had offices across the state, but now we have what's actually called the region offices.
Yeah.
There's meeting space for members to meet. There's a whole lot more that goes on now
Yeah.
in the regions since that methods and procedures
Yeah.
report.
Yeah.
Victor Costa.
He's our next subject.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Be here at Rome. So we'll talk to him about that in more detail.
Who knew?
We led right into it.
And then the full-time, of course, the full-time officers.
Well, I think that goes hand in hand with the
yeah.
region thing. That's,
Of course, the AFSCME affiliation. What's bigger than that?
right.
Being part of that
Yeah.
AFSCME affiliation,
Right, pretty
being
important.
part of the CSEA wars.
Yeah.
Boy, you grew up fast when you took a side.
Sure.
Being involved in statewide campaigns, that was an eye-opener. Serving on various statewide committees, and eventually ending up as a statewide officer. I mean, working for AFSCME was great also because I got to I got to travel. I got to meet people from other areas. I got a different sense of unionism than you do when you're just here in New York.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah, you kept getting the big picture.
I got the big picture.
Yeah.
But being a statewide officer,
Mm,
that's the
that's
best.
the best.
That's
Yeah.
the best.
Okay, one more. Lessons. Lessons from the past for the future. What have we learned that will help CSEA in the future?
I don't think we can forget. I think we tend to forget where we came from, forget our history, forget what got us where we are, and I think we can't do that. I think the need, the president needs to be at the bargaining table, and we're forgetting that. We need to take care of business. We need to network. I think it's important that people from all over the state know each other, learn from each other. And we are advanced, and I think we have to continue. If we have to continue being a leader, then we have to continue doing that. We can't wait for people to catch up to us. Right now, our new thing is being 100% affiliated in the New York State AFL-CIO. It's brand new for us, and it's eye-opening for many of our leaders and members who are now getting involved in the AFL-CIO. And I think that'll be our next conquest, quite frankly. But we can't forget how we got to this point. But I think we'll be taking over the AFL-CIO very shortly. It wouldn't surprise me at all, because our people are used to standards. They're used to accountability. There isn't that. They're finding that doesn't necessarily occur in these AFL-CIO areas. There's a lot of questions being asked. They're putting in their money. They want representation. So I think, remembering how we got to where we are, I think we'll be moving forward, and I think there'll be some new conquests coming along. And I don't think it'll take that long either, quite frankly.